The village of Odogbo was known far and wide for its bustling marketplace. Traders from distant lands traveled there to sell their goods, brightly colored fabrics, sweet-smelling spices, and handcrafted jewelry. But among all the merchants, none was as famous as Baba Ojo, the butcher. Baba Ojo's stall sat at the heart of the market, its wooden table always piled high with the freshest, most tender meat. Unlike the other butchers, who struggled to keep their prices fair, Baba Ojo sold his meat for unbelievably low prices. His cuts were finer, his portions were larger, and his meat was so soft it melted in one's mouth. The villagers loved him for it. Every morning, long lines formed at his stall. Women rushed to buy his meat for their stews, traders stocked up for their long journeys, and even the wealthiest families preferred his cuts over anyone else's. Baba Ojo's meat is a blessing, they would say. But not everyone was convinced. Some villagers whispered among themselves. How can he afford to sell his meat so cheap? Where does he get it from? Why is it always so fresh, even when the other butchers run out? Others had noticed strange things. Baba Ojo never slaughtered animals in public, unlike the other butchers. No one ever saw him buy livestock from the market, nor did he own a farm. Yet, every morning, his stall was filled with fresh meat. A few cautious elders warned, meat that comes too easily is not to be trusted. But their words were ignored. As long as Baba Ojo's meat was cheap, tender, and plentiful, the village kept buying. Little did they know, the truth behind his success was far more horrifying than they could ever imagine. Kwame was not like the other villagers. As a skilled hunter, he knew the ways of the land, the habits of animals, and the scent of fresh meat. He had spent years tracking prey, learning the difference between old flesh and newly butchered cuts. And something about Baba Ojo's meat did not sit right with him. At first, Kwame dismissed the whispers. People always gossiped in the marketplace about whose child was misbehaving, who had married for wealth instead of love, or which merchant was using tricks to sell bad goods. But the more he listened, the more he realized the rumors about Baba Ojo were not ordinary talk. Some claimed Baba Ojo was using dark magic to make his meat tender. Others swore he had a secret farm hidden deep in the forest, where he raised animals no one had ever seen. A few villagers even whispered that he made pacts with forest spirits, exchanging something in return for endless meat. But the most chilling rumors came from those who had noticed strange disappearances. 3 goats went missing from my pen last week, an old herdsman muttered. No blood, no tracks, just gone. I heard crying at night, a woman whispered. Like the wail of something, not human. Even the village elders grew uneasy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the oldest among them, Nana Kojo, spoke in a grave tone. No good meat comes without a price, he warned. Baba Ojo's fortune will not last forever. Kwame could no longer ignore the signs. He decided to take matters into his own hands. That night, Kwame sharpened his hunting knife, wrapped himself in dark cloth, and set out to watch Baba Ojo's butchery. He hid behind a stack of firewood near the stall, waiting to see if the butcher would bring in livestock. Hours passed. The marketplace emptied, the torches dimmed, and the night grew still. Yet Baba Ojo's stall remained untouched, no deliveries, no slaughtering sounds, nothing. Just when Kwame was about to give up, Baba Ojo stepped out of his hut. He glanced around the empty village, as if making sure no one was watching. Then, instead of heading toward a farm or an animal pen, he took the narrow road leading into the forest. Kwame's heart pounded. Why would a butcher need to go deep into the forest in the dead of night? Without hesitation, Kwame followed. He moved carefully, staying hidden behind trees, his hunter instincts keeping his steps light. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the eerie whispers of the wind through the trees. Then, just ahead, Baba Ojo stopped. Kwame crouched behind a fallen log, holding his breath. Baba Ojo knelt on the ground, muttering strange words under his breath. A sickly green light flickered around him, illuminating the darkness. Then came the sound that chilled Kwame's blood. A low, muffled cry, the sound of something struggling, something alive. Kwame's grip tightened on his knife. Whatever Baba Ojo was doing, it was not butchering animals. And he was about to find out the horrifying truth. Kwame's heart pounded as he crouched behind the thick underbrush, watching Baba Ojo's eerie ritual in the moonlit forest. The butcher knelt before a large, flat stone, his hands moving in the dim glow of a small lantern. Strange symbols, drawn in dark liquid, covered the ground around him. The air was thick with an iron-like smell, a smell Kwame knew all too well. It was the scent of fresh blood. A muffled whimper came from the shadows beyond the lantern's reach. Kwame squinted through the darkness and saw a bundle of cloth shifting on the ground. His stomach tightened. Someone was tied up, alive. Then, with swift, practiced movements, Baba Ojo lifted a gleaming knife. Kwame's breath caught in his throat. He had seen animals slaughtered before, had done it himself many times as a hunter. But this was different. This was not a goat. This was not an animal. The bound figure let out a strangled cry, but Baba Ojo slashed the blade across their throat, silencing them instantly. Kwame's body went rigid as he saw the truth: the person on the ground was human. His stomach churned as warm blood pooled beneath the lifeless form. But Baba Ojo was not done. He worked quickly, his knife moving with precision. He cut deep into the flesh, separating the limbs, stripping the meat from the bone, just as a butcher would do to a goat or a cow. Kwame's hands trembled as he realized what Baba Ojo's secret truly was. He was selling human flesh. The villagers, the women, the children, the elders, they had all eaten it. The thought made Kwame sick. He wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but then a branch snapped beneath his foot. Baba Ojo's hands froze. The butcher's head jerked up, his piercing eyes scanning the darkness. Kwame's breath caught in his throat. Had he seen him? For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then, in a voice as cold as death itself, Baba Ojo called out. "Who's there?" Kwame did not move. He did not even breathe. But Baba Ojo was no fool. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his blood-stained knife glinting under the moonlight. "I know someone is watching," he murmured, taking a step forward. "Come out, and I will make your death quick." Kwame's body screamed at him to run, but his hunter's instincts kept him frozen. He knew that one wrong move could mean his death. Baba Ojo took another step, then another, his feet crunching against the leaves. Kwame knew he had only seconds before he was found. Then, without thinking, he bolted. He dashed through the trees, his feet pounding against the earth. Branches lashed against his skin, but he didn't stop. He could hear Baba Ojo's footsteps behind him, quick and heavy. The butcher was chasing him. "You cannot run forever, boy." Baba Ojo's voice was closer than it should have been. "You know my secret. And for that, you must die." Kwame did not look back. His heart was hammering so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. The village was still far, but if he could make it past the river, he could lose Baba Ojo in the thick undergrowth. But then, his foot caught on a root. Kwame crashed to the ground, pain exploding through his body. Before he could scramble up, he felt a hand grip his ankle. Baba Ojo had caught him. Kwame twisted, kicking out with all his strength. His boot connected with Baba Ojo's face, and the butcher let out a snarl of pain. Kwame took the chance and bolted again. He could see the village lights flickering in the distance. Just a little further, just a little further. "Villagers! Help me!" Kwame screamed as loud as he could. Dogs began barking. Lights flickered to life. The village was waking up. Baba Ojo skidded to a stop. He knew he could not risk being caught. With one last glare at Kwame, he hissed, "This is not over." Then, like a shadow, he vanished into the forest. Kwame stumbled into the village square, breathless and shaking. He had uncovered the horrifying truth. But now, he had to convince the others before it was too late. Kwame stood in the center of the village square, his chest heaving, his clothes torn, and his face drenched in sweat. Villagers emerged from their homes, lanterns flickering in their hands, their faces filled with confusion and concern. "What happened, Kwame?" Nanakojo, the village elder, stepped forward, his wise eyes studying the frightened hunter. Kwame swallowed hard, his throat dry. How could he even say it? How could he make them believe? But there was no time for hesitation. He pointed toward the forest, his voice shaking. "It's Baba Ojo. He's been selling us human flesh." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Then, murmurs erupted. "What nonsense is this?" a man scoffed. "Human flesh? Do you know what you're saying?" "He's lying," another voice shouted. "Baba Ojo is a good man." Kwame clenched his fists. I saw him in the forest, cutting up a human body. That's why his meat is so cheap, why it's always fresh. He has been feeding us," he gagged, unable to finish the sentence. Some villagers gasped in horror. Others shook their heads in disbelief. "If this is true, where is your proof?" Nanakojo asked gravely. Kwame's heart pounded. "The forest. The stone. The remains. Come with me," he urged. "I'll show you everything." Nanakojo nodded. "Wake the warriors. If what Kwame says is true, we must act before Baba Ojo flees." Hunting the butcher. Armed with torches, spears, and clubs, the villagers followed Kwame into the forest. The night was thick with tension, every shadow stretching like claws, every sound making their skin crawl. As they neared the clearing, a horrible stench filled the air, rotting flesh and blood. Some villagers covered their noses, their stomachs turning. Then, they saw it. The flat stone, stained red. The remains, half buried in the dirt. The scattered bones, some with marks where they had been cut and butchered like livestock. A woman screamed. Others gasped in horror. Nanakojo knelt, his fingers trembling as he picked up a bloodied bracelet. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "This belonged to my grandson." His voice broke. Gasps of shock and grief rippled through the crowd. More villagers stepped forward, recognizing tattered pieces of clothing, broken jewelry, signs of the missing loved ones they had assumed were taken by wild animals or bandits. But they had not been taken. They had been slaughtered and sold as meat. The realization hit the villagers like a storm. Baba Ojo had betrayed them all. Nanakojo rose, his face hard with fury. "Find him." The butcher's fate. The villagers spread out, their torches lighting up the darkness. Baba Ojo's house was their first stop. The butchery was empty, but the smell of blood still lingered. Hooks, knives, and dark stains covered the wooden walls. A deep pit, covered with a straw mat, was uncovered. Inside, they found more bones. Rage built in the hearts of the villagers. "Burn it," someone growled. "Not yet," Nanakojo said. "We must find him first." Just then, a rustle. "There," a warrior shouted, pointing toward the trees. A shadow darted between the trunks, moving fast. Baba Ojo was running. But the villagers were faster. They surrounded him before he could reach the river. The butcher, once proud and smug in his stall, was now panting, wild-eyed, his clothes soaked in sweat. His knife was still in his hand, but against an entire village, it was useless. "Please," he gasped. "I did what I had to do." "The spirits." A warrior struck him across the face, sending him crashing to the ground. "You fed us our own people," Nanakojo's voice was filled with disgust. "You made us cannibals." The villagers roared in fury. Some lunged forward, ready to tear him apart. But Nanakojo raised a hand. "No. We will not become like him. The spirits will judge him." They dragged Baba Ojo back to the village, bound in ropes. The trial. At dawn, the entire village gathered. Baba Ojo knelt before the elders, his head bowed, his lips trembling. "Why?" someone cried. "Why would you do such evil?" Baba Ojo's voice cracked. A spirit came to me in my dreams, he whispered. It promised me wealth if I gave it blood. If I fed the village, it would make me prosper. And it did. My stall was full, my business grew. I never wanted to hurt anyone, but... His voice broke. He had no excuse. The elders conferred in low voices. Then Nanakojo spoke. For spilling innocent blood, for deceiving your people, for feeding us the flesh of our own kin, you are sentenced to death. The villagers cheered. Justice had come. Baba Ojo's own knives were used to end his life. His butchery was burned to the ground. The remains of his victims were given proper burials, and the village mourned. But the scars of Baba Ojo's evil lingered. No one ever ate meat the same way again. The days following Baba Ojo's execution were filled with grief, anger, and shame. The villagers mourned the loved ones they had unknowingly consumed, their hearts heavy with the weight of his deception. Families gathered in sorrow, remembering the missing children, the vanished travelers, the elders who had disappeared without a trace. How did we not see it? An old woman wept. How did we let this happen? The truth was bitter, they had been blinded by greed. They had ignored the warnings, dismissing the oddities in Baba Ojo's trade because his meat was cheap and plentiful. The village elders gathered in the center of the square, where Baba Ojo's stall had once stood. Nanakojo, his voice somber yet firm, addressed the people. This is a lesson we must never forget. We turned a blind eye to the signs. We ignored the warnings. Let this be a reminder, no good thing comes without a price. The villagers nodded solemnly. That night, a great cleansing took place. Baba Ojo's tools were thrown into the fire, his house torn down, his name never to be spoken again. The pit where he had hidden his victims was filled with earth, and the land was blessed by the village seer to wash away the evil. From that day on, a new law was made, no butcher would ever sell meat unless the entire village witnessed its slaughter. No one would ever trust blindly again. Greed and ignorance can lead to unspeakable horrors. The villagers, in their desire for cheap and easy goods, failed to question what was right in front of them. Baba Ojo's story teaches us that when something seems too good to be true, it often hides a terrible truth. Always question. Always seek the truth. And never let blind trust lead you to destruction.